Rome and Carthage, the costs of a century-long conflict. The Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BCE, between Rome and Carthage spanned over a century and fundamentally reshaped the Mediterranean world. These wars were not just about military domination. They were struggles for economic power, control over trade routes, and political supremacy. Both Rome and Carthage paid enormous prices, militarily, economically, socially, and politically, for these prolonged conflicts. By the end of the Third Punic War, Carthage lay in ruins, while Rome emerged as the unchallenged ruler of the Western Mediterranean, but at great cost to its own society and future stability. This analysis examines the costs that both Rome and Carthage bore over the course of the three Punic Wars, focusing on their economic, human, and social toll, as well as the long-term consequences for both civilizations. 1. The economic costs. Both Rome and Carthage suffered severe economic losses during the Punic Wars, especially in terms of resources, trade disruptions, and the economic burdens of sustaining long-term military campaigns. Carthage's economic strain. Before the Punic Wars, Carthage was a wealthy and powerful city-state, relying on its extensive trade networks, agricultural production, and control over key territories in the Western Mediterranean. However, the wars, particularly the First Punic War and Second Punic War, severely damaged Carthage's economy. Loss of territories. After the First Punic War, Carthage was forced to cede Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica to Rome, territories that were critical to its wealth. These islands were essential for Carthage's agricultural production and trade routes. Losing them weakened its economy and made it dependent on territories in Spain. War indemnities. As part of the peace treaties following both the First and Second Punic Wars, Carthage had to pay massive war indemnities to Rome. These payments drained Carthage's treasury, limiting its ability to rebuild its military and infrastructure. Trade disruption. The constant warfare disrupted Carthage's trade networks across the Mediterranean. Its lucrative trade routes, particularly in Spain and North Africa, were heavily impacted by the wars, and Roman naval superiority in the Second and Third Punic Wars further weakened Carthage's commercial power. Rome's economic costs. For Rome, the Punic Wars were also a massive drain on its economy, though the Republic's resources and vast network of allies allowed it to recover more easily than Carthage. Prolonged military campaigns. The Punic Wars required Rome to mobilize vast resources for over a century. The wars, particularly the Second Punic War, demanded constant recruitment of soldiers, as well as the construction and maintenance of fleets. This placed a heavy burden on Rome's economy, leading to increased taxation and the conscription of citizens and allies. Destruction of farmland. Hannibal's invasion of Italy during the Second Punic War caused widespread devastation in the Italian countryside. For nearly 15 years, Hannibal's forces ravaged Roman farmland, particularly in southern Italy, causing food shortages and economic instability. Loss of manpower. The scale of the Roman defeats, particularly at Cannae, 216 BCE, where Rome lost tens of thousands of soldiers, created a manpower crisis. This forced Rome to expand recruitment efforts, including calling on slaves and non-citizens to join the army. 2. The human costs. The Punic Wars resulted in massive human casualties on both sides, with devastating effects on the populations of Rome and Carthage, as well as their respective allies. Carthage's losses. Carthage, which had a smaller population base than Rome, was severely affected by the human toll of the wars. Military losses. Carthage's military, which relied heavily on mercenaries, experienced enormous losses throughout the wars, particularly in the Second Punic War. Hannibal's campaigns in Italy and the defense of Spain drained Carthage's military strength. The Battle of Zama, 202 BCE, effectively wiped out the last significant Carthaginian army, and Carthage could no longer field a capable defense. Civilian casualties. The Third Punic War resulted in one of the most catastrophic civilian losses in ancient history. After a brutal 3-year siege of Carthage, Roman forces slaughtered or enslaved nearly the entire population of the city. It is estimated that around 50,000 survivors were sold into slavery, while hundreds of thousands of civilians died during the siege or in its aftermath. Rome's human losses. Rome also faced significant human losses, particularly during the Second Punic War, when Hannibal's invasion of Italy resulted in some of the worst military defeats in Roman history. The Battle of Cannae, 216 BCE, one of the most devastating battles for Rome. Cannae saw the loss of between 50,000 and 70,000 Roman soldiers in a single day. This defeat left Rome vulnerable and caused a severe manpower crisis, as it struggled to replenish its legions. The long war of attrition. Hannibal's nearly 15-year presence in Italy led to the prolonged death and suffering of Roman soldiers and civilians. Many towns and villages in southern Italy were destroyed, and the rural population was displaced, leading to economic and social hardship. Continuous recruitment. Rome's ability to call on its allies for manpower meant that many of its Italian allies suffered high casualties as well. Despite these losses, Rome's manpower reserves were much larger than Carthage's, allowing it to continue the war effort even after catastrophic defeats. 3. The social and political costs. The Punic Wars not only affected the economies and populations of Rome and Carthage, but also had profound social and political impacts, especially on Roman society. Carthage's political collapse. Carthage's political structure was severely weakened by the Punic Wars, particularly the Third Punic War, which ended with the total destruction of the city. Loss of sovereignty. After the Second Punic War, Carthage was reduced to a client state of Rome, forced to disband its navy and unable to wage war without Roman permission. This left Carthage politically subservient to Rome and unable to protect its own interests, especially against encroachment by Numidia. Destruction of the state. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, marked the final collapse of Carthaginian political power. After the city was destroyed, its territory was annexed by Rome and turned into the Roman province of Africa. The once powerful city-state of Carthage ceased to exist, and its political institutions were wiped out. Rome's social and political strain. While Rome emerged victorious, the costs of the Punic Wars had significant social and political consequences for the Roman Republic. Expansion of latifundia. The prolonged wars, particularly the devastation of the Italian countryside during Hannibal's invasion, led to the growth of large agricultural estates, known as latifundia. Wealthy Roman aristocrats bought up the land of small farmers who had been displaced or ruined by the wars, leading to increased social inequality. Rise of the equites and economic imbalance. Rome's expansion after the Punic Wars created new opportunities for the equites, Roman knights, to engage in business and trade in the provinces. However, this also led to increasing wealth disparities between the rich elite and the poor citizens, exacerbating social tensions. Political instability. The massive influx of wealth and slaves from Rome's conquests created social instability. The displacement of small farmers and the growing inequality between the wealthy landowners and the urban poor contributed to the rise of populist leaders like Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, who sought land reforms to address these inequalities. These tensions would eventually contribute to the breakdown of the Roman Republic. Rise of military commanders. The Punic Wars, especially the Second Punic War, saw the rise of powerful military commanders like Scipio Africanus, whose military successes gave them significant political influence. This trend would continue in the following centuries, with military leaders like Julius Caesar using their military power to challenge the authority of the Roman Senate, leading to the eventual collapse of the Republic. 4. Long-term consequences of the Punic Wars. The century-long conflict between Rome and Carthage not only reshaped the Mediterranean, but also had profound long-term consequences for both civilizations. For Carthage, total destruction. Carthage's total destruction in 146 BCE marked the end of one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient Mediterranean. Its territory was absorbed into the Roman Empire, and the city of Carthage was rebuilt as a Roman colony, but the Carthaginian state, culture, and identity were forever lost. The end of Phoenician influence. As a Phoenician-founded city-state, Carthage had played a major role in spreading Phoenician culture across the Mediterranean. Its destruction marked the end of Phoenician political influence, as Rome and its culture became dominant in the region. For Rome, unchallenged Mediterranean dominance. The destruction of Carthage removed the last significant rival to Roman supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. With Carthage